Chickens are by far the most numerous bird species on Earth. There's over 25 billion chickens alive right now on our planet. That's more than 3 chickens for every single human on planet Earth. And just for some comparison, the most common wild bird out there, the red-billed quelea of sub-Saharan Africa, they have an estimated population of 1.5 billion. And so chickens are everywhere, but you probably know very little about chickens. And so today's video, what I'm going to be doing is going inside the chicken and showing you some things about chickens that you probably did not know, but you really should. So just to get right into it, chickens actually start as eggs, which you probably already knew. I have a basket of chicken eggs I just collected from our farm earlier this morning. These are fresh. And as you can see, there's actually a wide variety of them. You know, they can be different colors, they can be different sizes, they can be different shapes, but they all are chicken eggs. And every single chicken on planet Earth starts as an egg that pops out of a chicken. Just the other day here on our farm, we hatched out a whole bunch of chickens. I took eggs just like these that I'm holding here in my hand from my chicken flock. I threw them in an incubator, and almost exactly 21 days after doing that, those chickens hatched. And a hatching chicken is kind of a miracle because when it comes down to it, you know, a fertilized egg like one of these, they don't actually immediately turn into a baby chicken and start hatching. What has to happen is they have to be kept at the proper temperature and humidity. And if that is kept steady over that period of time, that 21 days, that is when they will hatch. And now one of the most Googled questions out there is whether or not a hen can lay an egg without a rooster. And the truth is a hen can lay an egg without a rooster, but a hen cannot lay a fertile egg without a rooster. And so I have roosters on my farm. Those roosters mate with the chickens, and then that is how we get these fertilized eggs. But again, because they don't immediately become embryos, I just make sure I store them properly at the right temperature. And you can eat a fertilized chicken egg and it's just fine. But let me just tell you guys, if you don't store one of these eggs at the right temperature and say it like sits out in the hot sun for 10 days, what you're gonna have is one of the grossest experiences of your life when you crack this egg open. Now that little baby chick that is being kept at the right temperature, whether it's a mama chicken sitting on top of it or whether you're hatching it in incubators, when that little chick is developing, you know, essentially it's just like a human embryo developing, where it develops all of its features and its organs and all the things that it needs to live in the outside world, but it does it all inside that shell. And inside that tiny chicken egg, it's got everything that that little chick needs to both split all of its cells and develop as an embryo and turn into a chick, but then also the food and nutrients it needs to grow, as well as the food and nutrients it needs for the first 2 or 3 days of life. And so what happens though is when that chick is ready to hatch, it has what's known as like a little egg tooth, which is like this little piece of hardness right on its beak. And what it does is from the inside of the egg shell, it scrapes on the egg, keeps going until it eventually scrapes out enough of that egg till it cracks. And then that's what's known as a pip. That pipping allows the chick to breathe oxygen for the first time. And then eventually with time, what'll happen is that chick is gonna fight its way out and break out of the eggshell. And so ta-da, you've gone from egg to chicken. Now those initial baby chicks that hatch are very fragile and delicate creatures. They are weak, they are tiny, they don't actually have real feathers. They're covered in this soft downy feathering, which helps keep them a little bit warm, but not nearly enough to keep them warm enough to survive long term. And so that's why you'll see the mama chicken sit on all of her babies, and that process of her sitting on those chicks will keep them warm. Here, if we hatch out chicks and it wasn't the mom that hatched them out, but we did it in an incubator, typically what we'll do is set up something known as a brooder. That brooder is what's used to keep the chicks warm. You also need to protect your baby chicks from predators, like anything from a hawk to a coyote to a hungry barn cat. They can easily eat those baby chicks. And really those newly hatched chicks don't need any food. Again, they lived off the yolk that was inside this egg, and they could do that for probably about 48 to 72 hours. Really what they're doing is just figuring out how to interact in the world and get their legs. And I'll tell you, and I've shared this on live streams many a time before, just the process of watching a baby bird hatch and go from being, you know, barely conscious to running around and eating food and drinking water and jumping around and playing with all of its friends. It is a magical process to see. Now, baby chicks will hatch incredibly quickly. You know, we hatched out a whole bunch of chicks here on our farm about 2 weeks ago. But now if you look at this little guy now, you can see he's already getting his grown-up feathers. He's got like all his wing feathers are coming in. Some of that down, which, you know, you still see down on his neck here, that's starting to turn into feathers too. And probably in about 2 or 3 weeks, he'll have all of his adult feathers and he'll be ready to run around as a full-on like adult chicken. You know, he's still living in it with all of his brothers and sisters in the chicken brooder, and I want to be very careful that I don't just let him go so he runs around here. And I will tell you, you know, a day-old baby chick, I could just like leave right here on the table and like not do anything with it. But when I have this chick that's, you know, about 2 weeks old, it will run all over this barn and I could spend like half my morning trying to catch it again. And so they are rapid growers. And when they're adolescents like this, you know, there's a lot of important development that's happening. You know, this is when their pecking order as a flock is starting to form. This is typically when they're learning their like societal behavior. And, you know, fun fact about chickens is they can actually recognize about 100 different faces, both human and chicken, and they remember where each of those faces stack rank in the pecking order. And probably me doing this right now is with this guy putting me at the top of the pecking order, and he will always remember me in this moment just by what we're doing here.
And one day, human, I will get my revenge.
And so, yes, these are very remarkable creatures, particularly as you start to watch them develop and grow. Now, once they become adult chickens, they are much more self-sufficient than when they're little ones. You know, they're still very vulnerable to predators. You know, when you look at a chicken evolutionarily speaking, there was the jungle fowl, which is what was essentially the bird species that gave birth to the chicken. And then humans, through selective breeding over thousands of years, produced all of the wide variety of chickens that we know today. I mean, honestly, the story of chicken evolution is not all that different than the story of dog evolution. And when you look at chickens, some of them are bred to produce eggs, some of them are bred to produce meat. The ones that produce eggs, they are like egg-laying machines. You know, they can lay somewhere between 250 and 300 eggs a year, depending on the breed. You know, those chickens, they will go out, at least on our farm, and they are running around in the pasture. They're eating bugs and seeds and fruits and plants and all sorts of things. I've seen chickens eat moles and mice. They'll eat pretty much anything. That's why they're actually amazing composters. Like pretty much all the kitchen scraps that we have that we produce here, they all just go right to the chickens. Basically, they eat anything other than the chicken that we might eat ourselves. And so the chickens here, which we mostly raise for eggs, they will end up producing more than 10 times their body weight in eggs in an average year. The other remarkable thing about chickens is they know flavors. They know salty, they know bitter, they know sour, but they actually can't taste sweet. So sugar doesn't entice them. But I have seen many a chicken consume an old gingerbread house over the years. Now, one of the most often Googled questions related to chickens is like, what's the difference between like chickens that make meat and chickens that make eggs? And the reality is just simply genetics. The chickens that are commercially making meat, like that you buy at the grocery store, or if you're at a fast food restaurant or something, like that chicken that you're seeing there, most of them come from a crossbreed of chicken known as the Cornish cross, where, you know, they were essentially engineered to be very, very quickly growing. They're harvested somewhere between, 6 and 8 weeks after they're born. Like they're already ready to be like basically butchered and sold as meat. The feed conversion, so how quickly they'll take food and then turn that into muscle mass and growth and weight and all of that. That feed has been engineered at this point to help produce quicker growing chickens. And those meat chickens, or broilers as they're often called, they are just like completely freaks of nature and are kind of weird. Like I said, here on our farm, we raise egg chickens, but I will also say that like the little chick you just saw me holding there a minute ago, that little guy, and I'm pretty sure he's going to be a rooster, he is essentially going to be raised for meat here on our farm, because the way we do it is we'll take the chicks that we hatch and, roughly speaking, half of them are going to be male and half of them are going to be female. The males we butcher, and that becomes the chicken that we as a family eat here on our farm. The roosters that we butcher, they take longer to grow, they're less meaty. They have like, smaller breasts and smaller thighs. But at the same time, I actually think they taste as good, if not better. There's just a really good flavor to them because of the way they live their lives. And they end up probably living about 12 weeks here on the farm, running around doing their thing. And so for me personally, I think that that's just an ethical way to consume chicken meat. I mean, you can eat any of the birds. It's just one that was engineered for meat, I don't know, lives kind of an abysmal life in my opinion, versus the ones that live like, I don't know, maybe some people say 12 weeks is still too soon. I don't know. I think they might live like a slightly better life. And yes, that is me trying to justify what I do. One of the more remarkable things about chickens is just how they're always on the watch for danger. They are vulnerable, as I said, and, I've had chickens killed by hawks before. I think I lost a chicken to a fox once. And so you can have your birds killed by predators. You need to, if you're keeping chickens yourself, you need to be thinking about security. So locking them at night when they go to sleep, because they become even more vulnerable then. But then also just even during the day, you got to be careful. You can use fencing. You can use like really good chicken coops. The thing we actually use on our farm to keep our birds safe is livestock guardian dogs. And so Toby Dog and Abby Dog patrol the farm, and they essentially create like a bubble around our farm that keeps other predators away. So essentially because I'm feeding Toby and Abby, they generally, except maybe in Abby's case, she has made a couple of mistakes over the years, they generally don't attack the birds, and they keep those coyotes away, or foxes or bobcats or raccoons or whatever. And so that is how we keep them safe, because again, chickens, they have limited flying ability. They can flutter around a little bit, but they're not going to be able to fly away like most wild birds around here. They have no real defenses to attack you. I mean, like, they can peck at you, but I've been pecked about 1,000 times from chickens, and I can count like 4 times that they've pecked me, and I've had them draw blood. So there's not much they're going to do to protect themselves in that way. And so if you're keeping chickens, you need to be keeping your chickens safe. Another interesting thing about chickens is that they have very unique eyes. So their eyes operate independently. So like one eye can be watching the sky while the other is like looking down on the ground, looking for food. They have excellent hearing, and they are constantly on the alert. If you watch chicken behavior, they're super skittish, and like anything that could seem like a potential threat, they will like run around and run away and freak out. The roosters that we have on our farm, they play an important role. They fertilize the eggs, as I mentioned earlier, but they also are really on the alert, even more so than the hens. And so they're the ones out there. And I've seen it happen many times where a rooster will like detect a threat and then get all of the hens to like go to some sort of safe spot, just in case if they like see like a hawk circling the sky. Chickens should never live alone. Like, they are community animals. They have communities. You should never just raise a single chicken. I mean, you could raise a chicken with like other forms of poultry, and they'll bond together and become a flock. But actually, even more importantly, chickens really need their own flock, and they can actually create their own structure. So what's known as the pecking order, like you've probably heard that term, that actually is a real thing derived from chickens, where you have your most dominant birds at the top. They're the ones who get the best food. They get to pick like where they roost at night and where they sleep. They get to pick the best nesting boxes. Like, all of that comes from being at the top of the pecking order, versus the lower on the pecking order chickens. They're going to be the ones who get beat up by the others. They have to eat last. They have to sleep in the worst spot. It's just how it works. I mean, pretty much most animal societies seem to have that structure, but I think when you look at chickens, and as somebody who's watched, poultry for years very, very closely, I have found that pecking order is very, very finely tuned. And occasionally you'll have violence, occasionally you'll have dust-ups, you'll have resettling of that pecking order. But that pecking order actually keeps things in order and keeps things in line. And so if you as the human try to disrupt it, I've found that it creates more problems versus solving anything. And so those disruptions can happen in a wide variety of ways, whether you're introducing new birds or you have a important higher bird get removed. That change can like create all sorts of chaos. Like, so for example, this fall, when I butcher all of my roosters from the birds that I hatched a couple weeks ago, the leftover hens are going to now be like kind of going crazy for a few days, trying to figure out who's the most important and who's at the bottom, because, you know, obviously there were roosters stacked and scattered throughout that entire stack ranking. And so it is something you need to be mindful of as the chicken keeper. Now, another important thing to know about chickens is that they poop constantly, which can be messy, but if you know how to use it the right way, it can turn into valuable fertilizer. Like, for example, right now I am growing giant pumpkins here on our farm that are almost entirely fertilized by chicken and duck and goose poop that I've composted, and that fertilizer and those nutrients can get recycled back into producing new food here on the farm. These chickens will poop several times an hour, and part of the reason why I decided not to shoot this video with the chickens sitting right here is because I didn't want to have my desk covered in chicken poop. And, you know, what you can see is too, like the way their digestive system works, it's really a fascinating thing. So the chicken will consume the food, obviously, through its mouth. It'll go in through the esophagus. Chickens, they don't have teeth, which is why that expression, scarcer than hen's teeth, is the way it is, because all they have is this beak. They do have something known as a gizzard, which is a organ that sits like right back here. That gizzard, they will typically like eat lots of rocks or pebbles, and it sits in their gizzard and it's used to grind up their food and help them digest. It's like almost like a muscle that when combined with those rocks, like will crush and break down whatever they've eaten. And so it will go from there down into, actually this red thing you can see here is the crop. That's where the food is further digested and broken down before going further into the digestive system. I don't want to take this whole thing apart, but essentially it'll go in through like kind of there, through the intestines, out the back. You'll actually see this hole right here. It's known as the cloaca, or some people call it the vent. This hole right here is like the chicken's back end hole for pretty much everything. You know, chickens don't pee or poop. They just make like one specific waste product that is very watery, but then also has solid matter into it. And so it all goes out this one hole in the back end. The other interesting thing is their sex organs actually also sit right back here as well. And so sexual intercourse and fertilization actually happens through this same hole too, where, you know, basically the rooster is putting his cloaca up against the hen's cloaca, and they're doing what's known as the cloaca kiss, and boom, there you go. That's how you get the babies. And by the way, while we're down here in this back end, this is where the eggs come out. And so the eggs also come out the cloaca at the back end. And what's interesting too is, you know, much like humans, chicken hens are born with all of the eggs that they're ever going to produce, and just over time, their body develops them and turns them into those eggs. And then boom, once they're ready, they get shot out the back end. You know, I've butchered mature female hens before. And what's always interesting is when you open up that hen, you can actually see like a fully developed egg maybe, and then maybe 2 or 3 other eggs like that are softer and less developed. And you can see them lined up back here just like this, just ready to be pushed out the back end, like almost lined up like they're in a production line of some sort. But yeah, so I know I said earlier chickens poop a lot, but they don't really poop. They just make their waste product. But they produce a lot of it. In fact, about 45 pounds of manure per year per mature chicken. And so the other thing you need to be thinking about if you ever have chickens is like, what are you going to do with that poop? You know, a lot of people will use just like bedding, and like when you take all of that nitrogen rich poop and you capture it in something very carbon heavy like wood chips or straw, what that does is it soaks it up, and then when you compost it and breaks it down, that's what becomes really usable. And also that soaking up material will help keep your birds cleaner as well. The other thing to note about chicken manure is that it's hotter than, say, like cow or horse manure. So when people say hotter, it means it's got like a lot more nitrogen to it. And so what that means is it's more effective at fertilizing your plants, but it also can burn your plants if you just put it on raw. And so you need to compost it. You need to give it a chance to break down a little bit, or else it actually becomes too much for the plants. Now, chickens, you know, much like humans, have finite lifespans, and naturally they can live somewhere around 5 to 10 years. Another fun little fact about chickens, the oldest chicken on record lived 16 years. Matilda, she apparently even appeared on The Tonight Show once. She was kind of a chicken celebrity. Here on our farm, I'm trying to think, the oldest chickens that we have I guess go back to 2020 when we first got that batch of chickens. And so they're, 5+ years old now at this point. They're still going strong, and I have several of them hanging around. I've lost birds to illness. I've lost birds to predator. It just happens. Sometimes I'll cull a bird, because the other thing to note too is if you have hens and you have your birds for laying, what you're going to find is after about 2 or 3 years, their egg production is going to drop significantly. Like I said before, the chickens are born with the same number of eggs, but then they start pushing them out slower and slower. You can change the rate that they're pushing them out. So for example, chickens will stop laying oftentimes in the winter months, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But in commercial egg laying operations, a lot of times they'll, find ways to motivate those chickens to keep laying longer. Those birds are going to run out of eggs sooner than, say, the birds on our farm where we let them have that dormant period. And so you just have to keep that in mind. I mentioned earlier that chickens will change how they lay eggs based on the time of year. There's this misconception that chickens will stop laying because it's cold. But the reality is chickens stop laying because there's less light. And so their bodies just know that less light means a colder temperature, means it's less likely a good time to try to raise baby chicks. And so that's oftentimes when their egg laying production will shut down. And so you got to keep that in mind when you are keeping chickens. And yes, you can use artificial light to extend your laying season. You can also add more protein to the feed, and that will encourage them to lay more. But the reality is, I do think that chickens need a little bit of an ability to rest, and it will give you healthier chickens that live a longer time if you do that. And so, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of a big fan of chickens. We've been domesticating them for roughly 8,000 years as humans, and yes, there's about 25 billion of them on the planet right now, which is probably too many. But at the same time, I do think it is useful for people to keep chickens. I'm one of those hippie types who believes that balance is one of the more important things in life. So yeah, that is how chickens work. They are fascinating creatures, and they are dang useful if you know how to use them. And I don't know, if you guys want to watch another video and learn how stuff works on a farm, check out one of these other 2 videos sitting over my shoulder. Thanks for watching, everybody.